use. Okay, hello everyone. So my name is Dominique Moore and I'm the Graduate Assistant for Career Development here at UConn Center for Career Development, where I specifically work on College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and diversity, equity, and inclusion events. And if you're here today, then you're here for the Red Flags in Real Estate Masterclass with Belma. A little bit of background on the masterclass events that we do. This is our fourth semester going into the master classes, and they were originally started really to provide some extra support for students within the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So the Center for Career Development saw a need and decided, let's connect with some alum and other campus partners and business partners that we have through the center, so that students are really gaining some more of the technical skills and industry-specific skills in different niche topics that they may or may not be studying. So thank you for coming today. And just quickly, I am going to read Belma's bio before I pass it over. So Belma started her career in real estate while completing her undergrad degree at the University of Connecticut. She has been a local to the greater Hartford area ever since her family migrated to the US from Bosnia in the early 2000s. Belma's extensive educational background in real estate paired with her ability to connect with the diverse members of her community allows her to earn the trust of her clients while really representing them in their real estate transactions. Belma specifically specializes in working with first-time home buyers and seasoned investors throughout the greater Hartford area. Her background in info technology has also allowed her to, and her clients, to have a competitive edge when participating in real estate transactions. So I am going to pass it over to her, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and great job with that. So hi everyone, I just want to let you all know that I appreciate any questions or collaborations throughout my presentation. We're going to be spending a bit over an hour together, so any messages in the chat are all welcome from me. And I want to make sure that you get everything that you can out of this presentation. So I am here to talk about red flags in real estate, and I specifically picked this title because I know for a bit, like on Twitter and all that, red flags were such a trend, like red flags in certain situations and making fun of that. So I really wanted to be able to connect with the undergraduate community with that, because I'm not that much older than anyone on this call. So yeah, at least so. But yeah, I wanted to just be able to connect so that this could be just like peer-to-peer talking and learning more about real estate together. So to get started, I'm going to let you know what we're going to be talking about today. So I'll give you a little bit about myself, even though Dominique gave a great intro, the one that I gave her. But I want to talk a little bit about real estate, a background about what real estate is, what to expect out of a transaction, going through a real estate transaction. My birds, if you can hear them, ignore them. They do not know what they're talking about. But going through a real estate transaction, and then also I have a case study that we're going to do a little bit after the introduction to real estate portion. If there's any questions, any comments at all, please write it in the chat. And then also I wanted to ask you guys, for the ones on the call, throw in here while we're talking, I want you to go put in the address of a home that you've been like window shopping on, like whether it's Zillow, even though I don't like Zillow, no real estate agent will tell you that Zillow is great. But whether it's Zillow, Realtor.com, etc., just put in the chat a home that you like, that maybe it'll be more fun if it's something that's like, you know, a goal house, you know, and not like a realistic, let's move in tomorrow house. Throw that in the chat, and then we're going to use that for the case study later. A little bit about me while you guys look at this great photo of me. I went to UConn and graduated in 2020. I got my real estate license in January of 2020, and I've been an active real estate agent ever since then. I work for a local brokerage in Wethersfield called Mickey Realty. We are a smaller brokerage that specializes in the Wethersfield, Rocky Hill, Cromwell area. And I am very happy that I chose that route, because real estate is not my full-time job. It's definitely something that was a hobby of mine and an interest growing up. And I always had an interest in helping people, but also I am fascinated by real estate. So I like the fact that I can still pursue my full-time job and do this on the side and do it in a way that works for me. My full-time job is at Travelers Insurance. I'm a data engineer. I did graduate with management information systems as my major. And outside of work, I really like to travel. I like to play tennis, even though you won't see me in Wimbledon anytime soon. I love going to the gym, and any free time I have, I do spend it with my family. So what is real estate? Specifically, legally talking, real estate is the rights that someone has to land and buildings. We can go down a rabbit hole talking specifically what those rights are, and there are zoning laws and all that change what your rights are. But usually when you own a home, you own the home, the land that the home is on. There's even air rights, like you own air above it to a certain extent. And a realtor, me and anyone else that goes by that name, is a person that acts as an agent for the sale or purchase of land or buildings. So real estate agents are specifically there to help you with your transaction, whether you are buying or selling the land or the building. And brokerage is basically an intermediary service. A lot of real estate agents, they're not standalone real estate agents, they work for a brokerage. And that brokerage is designed, again, to help people throughout transactions. And the word brokerage isn't just for real estate. There are like mortgage brokerages, there are law firms that can be called brokerages. But for real estate, I work for the brokerage Mickey Realty, but other brokerages are like Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax. There's so many brokerages. So high level, those are the key players in real estate. Now, there are two sides to a real estate transaction. There is the buyer side and the seller side. I made it very simple by calling it buyer's agent and seller's agent. Seller's agent could also be called listing agent because they're the ones putting the listing on the market. But the buyer's agent is responsible for representing the buying party, and the selling agent is representing the seller. And this person, these two people, these two sides could be the same person. That would be called dual agency. So if you list a home and, for example, you have an open house, someone comes in and sees the open house, wants to check the house out, they don't have an agent that they're working with. You, the listing agent who's there at the open house, could also represent them, but you have to be very honest and transparent about the fact that you are also listing the home. So those are the two key players in a real estate transaction. And then going through a real estate transaction, this is a very, very simple timeline. Things can get very complicated, but usually in real estate, you start off with the listing. That would be step one. This would be the selling agent listing the home. And then you go into the showings portion of a real estate transaction. So the home's listed, it's on the market. The listing agent has done what they do with marketing the home and presenting it to who they think would buy the home. But showings are where buying agents go and request showings so that their clients could go check out the home and see if they're interested. And then after the home has been on the market for a bit and people have checked it out, there comes the offers portion of the real estate transaction, where buyers and their agent put together offers to present to the selling agent and their seller, and then they review the offers and select which one works for them and which person they are basically going to allow to purchase their home. Then, whether that offer was taken or not, offers are actually contracts. So when you go and put in an offer, it's not just, hey, I want to buy your home. It's a very extensive contract that lists what you're going to buy the home for, what percent of the money comes from a mortgage, all of the details that come with when the closing is actually going to happen and everything in between. So the contract, which is the offer that both parties signed, there's an execution period. So if you said that you're going to buy the home for this much money and you're dependent on selling your home in order to have that money, then you're going to put in, when are you going to sell the home for? When are you going to sell the home by? When are you going to have that mortgage, secured? When are you looking to move in? When are you looking to have the inspections all done? Those are all key parts of the contract, and executing those is the fourth step before the closing. And the closing is the day that the title goes from the seller to the new buyer, who is now the new owner of the home. And that is when lawyers will tie up all the loose ends and you will officially be the new owner of this home. Any questions on any of that? All right, sounds good. So for the case study, the reason why I wanted you guys to put in addresses of homes that you were window shopping is because real estate agents often use something called a comparative market analysis, a CMA. And this is a tool or a process that real estate professionals use to determine the market value of a property. Now, there are different words for how much homes cost, and they all are dependent on who is using that term. For example, market value is what people on the market right now, so buyers, what they would be willing to buy this home for. And then you will see something like an assessed value. So if you ever go on real estate websites, they'll tell you an assessed value, and that value you'll see is a lot lower than what the house will be sold for or what the house is on the market for. And the assessed value is actually the value that the when you go in and get the value assessed, like when you go in and have a mortgage and a mortgage person goes and does an assessment on your home, they see how much that house is worth. And the tax officials in the town, each town has a specific tax percentage that you pay property taxes for your home on, and usually it's about 70% of the assessed value. So when you're looking to buy a house, you don't really want to look at the assessed value because that's going to be a lot lower than the house will ever go for. And that number is relevant to you only for tax purposes. Like you obviously you don't want to pay a lot of taxes, and in some towns you really don't have a choice because taxes are a bit higher. But when you're looking at assessed value, you don't want to think, I'm not going to get this house because the assessed value is very low. It doesn't really matter. It just matters how much taxes you're paying on it. But when you're looking to buy a house, you really want to look at the market value. And the market value, when you want to sell a house, the market value is where the most important part is between a buyer and a seller. So what we use to determine the market value of a home, like if we're going to put a home on the market, is we look at the house, we look at the characteristics of the house. So the very big numbers are how much square footage does it have, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, the type of home it is, and some unique details. For example, if this house that you're about to put on the market has a pool, it wouldn't necessarily be fair to compare it to other homes that don't have a pool. Or if it has a really, really big yard, you're not going to necessarily compare it to a home that has no yard at all, or an apartment building for sale to own the apartment building. So things like this are very important to look at because you want to look at what the buyers are like for the property. And if you're looking at a home that's a lot smaller, you definitely don't want to go and market it to people who have big families. You might want to if it's like a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, you don't want to market it to big families, and you don't want to look at it compared to other homes that a big family would live in. You're going to look at it as someone maybe like a new couple, a couple with a dog, someone that's looking to downsize. You're going to look at all these characteristics, and that's what the buyer is most likely going to be. Maybe someone younger, maybe someone older that don't need a lot of space. And what you're going to look at it too, aside from the home, is where it's located. So you never want to compare a home in one part of town to a home in a different part of town, because that might be something that the buyers are specifically looking for. They might be looking for a home specifically in this town that might be in the school district of a specific school and all that. And you also want to look at, if you're looking at a home for what it's sold for within the last 30 days, you want to look at what house is similar to your house sold for, so that you can predict what yours will sell for. And this time in real estate has been really interesting because I got my license in January 2020, and it was like the height of the pandemic a couple months later. So everything that you learn is really put to the test because you want to take your textbook knowledge, but also apply it to the market that we're in. Because a lot of things just went straight out the window, like a buyer's market and a seller's market. Usually that is determined on the time of year. Whereas if I'm being honest, it feels like it's been a seller's market for the last like 2 years, depending on where you're looking at. So I always, when I'm looking at comparative market analyses, I always look at the last 30 days that a house sold for, because a lot can change in a month, especially nowadays with interest rates too. A lot can change in a month, and you never want to look at, well, my neighbor's house sold for double 2 years ago, because it's not 2 years ago. Like, things are going really quickly, and it's important to stay on top of that and see what the prices are going for now. So I'm going to look at your chats because, okay, I'm gonna look at your chats to see what addresses you put together. And the reason for this is because, oh, and thanks for apologizing for the Zillow thing, because I saw 2 Zillow links. But I'll look at what you put on, and we're gonna go through a CMA together using what I was telling you about. So there's one house in Coventry, pretty house, and then there's another house in Texas. And I actually really like the fact that you guys chose houses completely. One in Texas, one in Connecticut. So what I want you to do, I'll give you like 5 minutes. If you're on Zillow, that's fine. Realtor.com has the same options, but I will use, oh, I can't move my, so I'm on Zillow right now. I'm going to try to talk through it because I don't know how to move what I'm looking at from my other monitor. So I'm looking at the house in Houston, and it's listed at 340. So this is already a house that's for sale and listed. So they probably already did a CMA. But to talk you through how a CMA is gathered, more or less, because we do have our own MLS system that helps us gather all the research and all that. But on Zillow, what you're going to do, and Lisa too for your Coventry house, and Eileen, if you do have a house in mind that you're just, curious about, go into that area. So I know Houston, Texas, because that's what I'm looking at. Houston is big. So you want to go into the 1 to 2 mile radius of that home that you were looking at. And instead of the filter being on sold or for sale, because you're looking at houses for sale, look at it for sold. So look at what the homes within 1 mile and 2 miles are sold for or were sold for. And in the right-hand corner, sort by, you can sort by newest, and that will show you the most recent sold homes nearby where you're looking at that house. And then also you can look at the filters on top. So like 2 options away from sold, you have the bedrooms and bathrooms. So that house, let me try to find, because I lost it again. But that house has 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, and it's just under 3,000 square feet. So you want to narrow it down to 4 bedrooms, at least 3 bathrooms. And there's specifics, like if it's 3 bathrooms, but it's really like 2.5, those are like the nitty-gritty details that matter if you're really, really trying to make the house sell right away. Like you can't compare it. If you only you have 2 half baths and 1 full bath, you can't really compare it to a house that has 3 full baths. But to get a ballpark, you can just see what's on the market, because if there's no other homes within 2 miles that have 3 bathrooms that are full baths, you are going to have to look at the ones that have half baths too. So do those filters based off of what your house looks like, and look at what other homes are on the market. So what are you guys seeing? Are you seeing homes that are like similar to the price of yours?
Yeah, as I'm going through the one in Texas, I think most of the ones nearby are around the same price, like no less than 10,000, no more up or down. The interesting thing that I did see though was like literally like right across the street, those houses are in like the 200,000s, but those are also like, they went down by a bedroom and down by a bathroom.
Yeah. And that's actually like a really good, that's something that I wasn't gonna, because I mean, real estate, we could talk about real estate for days, but something that's really interesting about areas like that that are very similar in, if it has one more bedroom, one more bathroom, then it's gonna change the price to a normal amount, like an expected amount. And a lot of times in areas like that, and I've seen this a lot in Texas too, is there are a lot of areas that have new builds. I didn't check when this house was built, but a lot of times new builds have very similar homes in the same area or in the same like cul-de-sac, but their prices are really dependent on what the layout plan looks like and how many bedrooms they have, how many bathrooms they have, which is a really good place to be in if you are in an area that has homes that are very comparative to yours. It's pretty easy to like know what the house is going to go for, because you can always look at your neighbor's house, and if they're selling, you can look at what they sold for, and you can always have a good ballpark whether you have an agent or not. Like you can do those CMAs in your head. But if you're looking in an area where one house is $500,000 and the other house is 200 something thousand, and then the one down the street can go for $1 million, but then there's this one random house that's been abandoned for like 5 years right in the middle of all of them, which is more likely, like it's more likely that you live in an area like that than an area with new builds. But with areas like that where the houses are all over the place, at times it can be the most beneficial to be the house that's, not the worst house, but not the best house either, because the best house on that street is always going to get cut short with the potential that it could sell for, because whoever comes and sees how great that house is, they're going to see how the houses next to it don't really live up to how great that house is. So you're always going to have trouble. You're going to be stagnant for a bit until your neighbors start, improving on their curb appeal and fixing their homes up. Your house is going to stay stagnant a little bit, because even though you can find another house a mile away that's just like yours and is selling for a lot more than yours is, you can compare. You can always compare and say, this has 5 bedrooms, this has 5 bedrooms, this is going for 1.5 million. That my house, like we're the same house, we can go for the same amount. But the difference between those two places is the neighborhood around it and things like that, which aren't always going to come up on our CMAs. Like when we go and meet with someone who is going to be a potential client and someone we can sell their house for, that we can sell their house, we have all these things that we know beforehand on the computer, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, how big the house is. But then when you come to the house, actually, you'll see maybe the roof is a little older and will need to be replaced right away. Or their neighbor is a hoarder and just keeps a bunch of stuff outside. And even though that doesn't matter to your house, it does, because yes, the person is going to be living in the house you're putting on the market, but there's all these other things that become factors that we always like to tell our clients about, because it can be frustrating. You find a house just like yours that's selling for a lot more, and you're wondering, why can't my house sell for that much? And you always have to keep in mind that there are other factors, not just like square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms. There are other things that come into play with the market value, because like going back to what market value actually is, it's how much people are willing to pay for your house. It's not just your house excluded away from everything else. So does that give you guys a better idea of like how pricing is put up, or what people are like selling their homes for? Okay, cool. Moving on. Is there any questions on that? Great. So the listing appointment, I touched upon this a little bit, but the listing appointment is the first step in what I would think a real estate transaction. Even though listing appointments don't always turn into an actual transaction or an actual client, a listing appointment would be when an agent schedules a listing appointment with a potential client. So the following happens: the client, which would be maybe a seller in the future, gives them a tour of the home. The agent would give them a comparative market analysis, what they already did, the research of like what homes similar to theirs are selling for, what they could put it on the market for, given all of these, like if they come and they see that the house is would have to be completely gutted. Obviously, the price that they originally came with doesn't stand, but you always want to come in with some type of information to give your client, and discussing what the client needs are and what the selling process would entail. So you always want to make sure that if this person is interested in selling their home, that you go through all of what would require to be done for the home to be sold. So if they're looking to sell their home, but they don't actually want to move for another couple months, then you can give them all this information, but let them know that we can't actually put your house on the market until you're actually willing to move out of it. And then a listing agreement too. So a listing agreement is a contract between the agent and the seller on what the expectations are, just on paper. So how long they have to sell the home, how they would like to be working with the client and the listing brokerage. So how far are they marketing their home? What is in the package that comes with working with that real estate agent? And also the commission percentage that they agree upon. So when the home sells, what commission is being split between the buyer and the seller, the buyer agent and the seller agent. These are all things that go into a listing appointment. And what I'm going to do after talking about each of these different stages of a real estate transaction is to give you some red flags that can be beneficial for you as maybe a potential buyer, or you working with a real estate agent, or maybe even you if you decide to get your real estate license. What red flags will you see in these different stages of a real estate transaction? So red flags and listing appointments. There are so many more, by the way. It was hard to just narrow it down to 3 because there's always red flags everywhere in this line of business. But the individual requesting to meet with you, the agent, is actually not the owner of the property. And this happens a lot more than you think. So if you think about it in just regular real life, if you have a parent that owns your home, that owns a home that you live in, and you're curious, you want to see what the house would sell for, you really want to nudge them to sell the home, it's a great time to sell, etc. So you, because you have the good intention of, selling your parents' home, you reach out to a real estate agent to get their opinion on what the home is for. While that does make sense to you, working with a real estate agent, you really want to make sure that if you're inquiring about how much would this house sell for, you really want to make sure that you are the owner of the house, because you want to make sure that you're talking to directly who is going to be making those decisions, and you don't really get much out of hypothetically speaking what the house will sell for, and if you're not talking to the person that is responsible for the home. And a lot of things can be lost in translation. So you could be talking to a relative of someone who owns a home and give them a piece of information, but because they're not a real estate professional, they might go and tell the person who actually owns the home. Some things might get lost in translation. So I always recommend for real estate agents, but also people who are looking to put a house on the market, that it's the person who owns it. And it's always, I was mentioning in my background, I have worked with people from all different backgrounds, and it is so helpful when, let's say, English wasn't my first language either. So if I'm working with someone that English isn't their first language and we need someone there to, connect the dots and explain certain things to me and to the owner of the home, that's completely okay. But you want to make sure whenever you're having conversations about the sale or purchase of a home that you're speaking to the person that's making the decisions. And I can't stress that enough. Disagreement between multiple owners of the property. This is very common too. So if you have a husband and a wife, husband and husband, wife and wife, if you have 2 people that are, or mother, son, who are 2 people who are on the deed, and you are invited to a listing appointment and you want to, this person wants to see how much the house will sell for, it's really important to know going forward whether or not the 2 people that are responsible for the home are on the same page, because you never want to get into the situation where maybe there's a divorce going on and one person wants to sell the house, the other person doesn't. While you have every good intention to go in and tell them what the house will go for, explain the process to them, you still need to have both people sign agreements. If there's two people that are owners of the home, you need them to sign, both need to sign the agreements that you're going to put the house on the market. And you never want to get stuck in between some deliberations that haven't came to an agreement yet, because there's going to be a lot of headache and a lot of back and forth that's dealing with that. So if you do find yourself in a position as an agent that goes to a listing appointment, they see that there's two people that are never going to agree on anything, it's okay to say, I'll come back to you guys when you're ready, and explain that they both need to be on the same page before you move forward. And that will happen a lot of times where there could be the potential for a deal, but there's a lot of things involved that might not make it worth your time right now. So you can always give them all this information and then come back. And then on the seller side, if you have another person that is on the title for the home and you're not on the same page, make sure you're on the same page before you bring in a real estate professional to actually sell your home, because that's what we're here for. We're here to sell the house. So unless you have a house that's ready to sell, like, keep us in the loop, but at a distance if you're not ready to go right away. And then another thing is, you can't establish agreement or respectful relationship with the client. And this goes both ways. Real estate is a business. People do make money off of the purchase or sale of a property. Let's make that very clear. Like, it is a business, but also something that I've learned specifically doing this part-time is that you really want to work with people that you trust and that trust you, because it could be a way to make money, but some things just aren't worth the headache. And if you know you are never going to, if you come into a listing agreement and you know this person wants to work with you, but they're never going to respect you, if you know that they're going to agree to have you list their house, but they're going to question every single thing you say, they're not going to agree with everything, like every single thing is going to be a tug and pull, sometimes it's really not worth it and you do need to walk away. And in the beginning, you don't know like what your boundaries are, because you don't know. It's like you learn as you go, but you really want to work with people that want to work with you. And on the client side too, if you are working with a real estate agent and you know that they're really not respecting what you're saying, if you're telling them you're only comfortable putting this much of an offer in and they keep pushing you to make a bigger offer, or they keep being weird about certain things, it's okay for you to say like, no thank you, I'm going to go work with someone else, because you don't buy a house every single day. And even if you're working with investors that can make these really big decisions like real quick, you still have so much trust that's being put into you and what you're saying to them, that you want to make sure you both are on the same page with how much you trust each other. And that's really important, establishing right away. You don't want to realize this when you already made an agreement and you already signed contracts to work with someone. You want to make sure from the beginning that you're on the same page. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. So the next step to real estate transaction is showings. Showings are the fun part, if I'm being honest. They're where you're going to go with your client, you're going to go show houses, you're going to go see what's on the market. A lot of times what's put on the market is not like the pictures you see are nothing like what's actually in person, and you realize that. And it's fun, it's very fun. It can be stressful, but we're here to make things like this fun for you too. So the showing is an appointment to view the property on the market. So the selling agent is there with their client to approve the showing request. So when you put a house on the market, you talk to your client and say, when do you want people to come by? Is it an all day kind of thing? If they're already moved out of the house, then you can have it be like a go and show, which the minute a request comes in, it's approved and the person can go see the house. Or maybe you need like 24 hours if you have tenants. You want to make sure that they are going to let people in. And then the actual showing can be 15 to 30 minutes. Typically, there are some like showings that allow like hour-long showings, but if I'm being honest, that's very less likely now, because by the time you see a house, a lot of times you get an email like the next day from the selling agent like, hey, we need all offers by tomorrow. So you don't really have time to go in and see it for an hour. But oftentimes you request a showing with your client, you go see the house with your client, and then you make decisions whether or not you want to move forward or you want to go see some more homes. And usually the selling agent and the seller are not present, but there are times where they are present. So when you're going to see the house, you always want to make sure that you and your client are on the same page with you're just going to view the house, but all conversations about what you like about the house, what you don't like about the house, whether you're going to put an offer in or not, are not at the actual house. You want to make sure you're like off the property before you have these conversations. And some red flags about showings. So one is disorganized showing request process. And this happens a lot. This actually happened to me the other day where I requested a showing, it was approved. And you don't know, as an agent requesting the showing, you don't know if it was approved by the listing agent or if it was approved by the seller. So all you know is like you put in a request and they said, yeah, you can come at time. And then once they accept the request, you get information on where the key is, if you need an electronic lockbox or if it's just going to be a dial where you get the key. You get information a lot of times if they have cats. Sometimes people don't say that, but a good agent would always let you know, because I have really bad cat allergies, so I always appreciate it. But they give you information on like whether the tenant's going to be there. We like to help each other out a lot of times, so we leave comments for each other on navigating these different parts of the transaction. But it happened the other day where I got a request, it was approved. I go and meet my client at the site to go see the home. There were like 5 lock boxes in front of the house, which they didn't specify which one would be the one that I look at. So I looked at all of them, none of them were working. So I give a call to the agent and they let me know in the showing time, which is the application, they said that they would be like, it would be by lockbox. So I get the key from a lockbox and they gave me a code for the lockbox. However, when I called the agent, they said that the tenant would let me in, which they didn't specify that. And they also said that the tenant wasn't responsive all day. So I probably won't be able to get into the property to see the house because the tenant wasn't replying, which were all things that could be avoided. I mean, they could have told me in the morning that the tenant was unresponsive. And they also could have told me that the tenant would be letting me in because I was just looking stupid in front of my buyer looking for a lockbox that none of them would open the key for me. So things like that happen all the time. And unfortunately, you never really know your time is being wasted until it's already wasted in real estate. So you can't know. Like I couldn't have known that a tenant would be letting me in and that I would be looking for a tenant because that information wasn't presented to me at the time. So things like that are red flags because for this property specifically, they had to take it off the market because they realized the selling agent, they were working with a tenant, but the actual seller of the home wasn't living there. They were just renting it out. So they didn't know that it would be such problems with showings. And you can't have someone buy the property unless you give them a chance to see the property. So they actually took the house off the market and had to fix that problem and then are going to put it back on again. And that's why it's a red flag. It's not always a red flag. Sometimes, honestly, like life happens. You're working with people, real people who are living their real lives. And sometimes things happen out of the blue where you can't go see a house that you were told you could go see, which is fine. But oftentimes it's like a clear red flag that like if your buyer really wanted this property, you're going to have a lot of tug and pull throughout the process. Something else is sellers are present, overly engaged in the tour. And this happens a lot and is a red flag for a lot of sellers and the seller agents on the selling side. Because if you are working with someone who's putting their home on the market and you explain to them very clearly, like when people come to see the house, just stay out of their way, let them see it. If they have any questions, have them talk to us. Because a lot of times you might dig yourself in a hole as a seller if you're present at the showings and you're just word vomiting, like someone sees something on the wall that could be like a scratch and you go and tell them a long story about a leak that you once had in the house and how like that might be a stain from it. And while we are required to by law like have disclosures that we present to the buyers, unless it's an estate sale and there's loopholes to that, but most times there's disclosures and we are very honest and we need to be very transparent with the information that we know about the house. But the reason why it's important to work with a real estate agent is because we're handling the business for you. You don't need to tell them all this extra information that wasn't asked for. And you might, have a buyer who loved your house and was willing to buy it, but you scared them away with all of this random information that might not be necessary. So it is okay. I've had a lot of sellers that, they have kids, they can't really leave the house for hours at a time and come back and things like that. So I always say you can go take your kids on a walk, or you can just be outside hanging out. You don't really just need to follow people around and tell them information about the house. And if they have any questions, then have them come to us. And especially with offers, a lot of times I've had clients, the sellers, be there, and then they would have conversations about pricing of the house with potential buyers. And it never goes well because we're there to negotiate for you, and you don't need to do the negotiating. So that's a really big one. And also, you've been catfished. A lot of times you get catfished. Oftentimes, actually. More times will a house not look like what it looks like on the pictures than it will. And there are some things that are okay, and I would consider a pass. For example, grass. If you are putting a house on the market and you have to tweak a few things, like if there is this part of grass that does not grow and you want to like appeal more buyers, maybe you can like Photoshop a little bit of grass, make it a little greener. But there are some things that you just shouldn't, maneuver on the pictures to get people in, because what happens there is you waste the time of the buyer and the seller, because you have people coming in thinking they're going to see a house that doesn't look like how it looks like. And some things, like I said, are a pass, but a lot of times you could just leave the house as it is. And clear things of being like catfish, for example, are like there's a leak in the ceiling of a room, but they're going to not show the ceiling. If they take a photo, it's like you see a photo of the room without the ceiling, and you don't know until you go there and see the ceiling that you realize, oh, wow, there was a leak there. So we can protect you sometimes with certain things. Like if a room looks a lot bigger than it is, and we know like it's a certain square footage, there's no way that room is that big, we can try to like prepare you for certain things. But there are some things that like you don't know until you go there and realize that the house wasn't what you thought it was. So then the next, wait, has anyone been catfished? Like, have you ever seen a home and you were like, wow, this looks nothing like it did in the pictures? No? Okay. All right. So offers. The next stage is, so you've seen the houses, you've taken your client to see homes that are on the market. And usually when you're showing people homes, it's within the assumption that they're going to buy a home. So the offer would be the purchase and sale agreement between the buyer and the seller. So this features, it's a contract, and it features terms and agreements between the buyer and the seller regarding the sale of the property. And this also includes, like I mentioned before, like contingencies. So if they want an inspection, or if they are going to get a mortgage, by when are these things going to be completed? And a lot of times, especially in today's market, and what I do with my clients is I always include a pre-qualification. If I'm working with a buyer, I include either proof of funds if they're buying cash, or pre-qualification, because in today's market, if a house is priced correctly, it's going to go really quickly, and you want to make sure that when you're putting in your offer for your buyer, you're putting together the best offer. So you can be very competitive in how much they're putting down on the house, how much they're willing to pay for the house, if they're willing to waive any inspections or any that, like if they're willing to make the closing a lot shorter, if they know for sure they're going to have a mortgage. There are certain things that you can do to make it competitive and win them the house. But I believe that showing the seller that you have the funds and you're ready to go and you're not wasting any time is really helpful, especially today's market, because you could put in an offer for a certain price, but then you might have not been pre-qualified for a mortgage. And if you are dependent on a mortgage to buy that house, you might have gotten in an agreement with the seller, you're going to buy their house, and then a week later you realize you can't get the mortgage for that much money. Then they got to go and put their house from under contract to back on the market. And you don't want to waste your time or someone else's time like that. So I always recommend, before even looking for a home or discussing anything with a real estate agent regarding putting in an offer, that you already know for sure that you have pre-qualification or you have the funds to buy the home. And that's especially important in today's market because things are changing so quickly. I've had buyers that were pre-qualified at one point and maybe they didn't find their perfect home within the month that they had for their pre-qualification. So they went back to get another pre-qualification or get it extended, but they might have lost their job within the meantime. So then banks, they don't want to lose their money either. So it's really important to keep in mind that you are working with real people that have real things going on in their life, whether it be getting a job, losing a job, change of credit. So you always want to make sure when you're going and putting in offers that you are not wasting anyone's time, especially if it could be avoided. Because sometimes things happen and it's not your fault, but you want to make sure you're not like knowingly wasting people's times. And the offers are drafted by the agent. They're signed by the buyer. So all these contingencies and all that, they're drafted up by, let's say me, if I'm on the buyer end. I have my buyer sign it. And if any disclosures were given by the selling party, we sign those too, acknowledging that we've looked at the disclosures. We know what you're disclosing about the house. And then we send it to the seller's agent, and then the seller reviews all those offers with their seller or selling agent. They review those together, and then they decide which one is best for their house and their certain situation. So it could be like they don't want to move for another 3 months, and they find an offer that fits that criteria the best. I can never explain to you why one offer gets chosen over another, because you would think a lot of times it's about money, but it might not always be, especially in today's market where things are overpriced as is. If you have an offer that comes in that's way over asking, you would think like, okay, my seller, I'm going to ask that they take that, or I'm going to, suggest that they take that one. But that wouldn't always be the best case, because you could take an offer that's way over asking, but then when it comes down to the buyer actually getting their mortgage, your mortgage appraiser is going to go out and say that the house is actually not worth that much, and they're not going to give you the loan for the price. And you're going to have a situation where the buyer might have to come up with that extra money to make up for the gap that is the market value and what they appraised it for the loan, and they might not have the money. So you might be a month into this transaction and ready to close, they can't get the house. So then you got to put it back on the market and cut the price down, because you know this information now, and you can't continue thinking you're going to get a cash buyer one day. So there's so many things that go into the offers portion, and any section of this, if you'd like to talk about it after the call or shoot me a message, I'm very willing to talk about it with you. But because it's such a complicated portion, there's obviously a lot of red flags that come into the offers part of a transaction. For example, shady agents. I've worked with so many shady agents in my time, which is only 2 years. And you always have to think, like, if you're working in a business that benefits from the purchase or sale of real estate, right? So we don't get paid until there is a closing. We don't charge people by hour. We don't, in order for us to make money, there needs to be a sale. So all the time that we spend working with clients off, anywhere, talking to clients, emailing them, sending texts back and forth, looking into things for clients, we don't get paid for that. We only get paid if a client actually wants to go sell their house, we successfully sell it, or if they want to buy a house and they actually buy a house. So when it comes down to working with other agents, you can encounter a lot of shadiness on both ends, on a buyer and a seller. And a lot of times we are working, and I mean, most times we should be working for the best interest of our clients. So if our client says they want to buy a home in this area for this much money, we're doing our best to make sure that we have a satisfied and happy client. But sometimes within interactions with agents, you can see that it might not be the best situation for your client. For example, I had a deal once where I put in an offer for my client, and this was actually an offer that was above ask. So, and in real estate these days, I mean, that's a lot of times the offer is going to be above ask. So we put in an offer for my client, and I get a call from the listing agent that let me know that, best and final is going to be by the end of the day. We already had an offer in that was above ask. They let me know that there's X amount of offers, and they have one offer that has like the buyer willing to go up to a certain amount of money. So they're willing, like they're telling me, hey, we have offers, this many offers. One of them is actually like 50 grand over your offer. You have until end of the day to give me another offer. And you can't do that. Like that's not okay. I mean, it is a competitive market, and we do want to win in a way. Like, you want to win your client that house, or you want to win that sale and get them the best money that they can for the house. But in my opinion, you get that by, if you want to get them the best money for their house, you do your research. You make sure you let them know this is what's going to make your house sell for more. This is what's going to make your house sell fast. You price it correctly. If you want a bidding war on the house, you price it just right, and then have people come in and see how much they're willing to pay for the house. But you never let the idea that you're getting money off of this sale cloud your judgment to then try to like trick other people, to trick their clients into putting in an offer that is a lot of times a lot more than they're comfortable with. And because we have so much trust, and I work with people that trust me and I trust them, I know that if I tell them, hey, you should put an offer a little bit higher if you want the house, they're going to take my word for it. And there's a lot of like, I don't have the guilty conscience of knowing that like I just like scammed them into getting a house that they might have not gotten had I not told them to get it. And for what? Because I know that like it would have gotten accepted and I would have made more money on it. And also, in business, if someone's giving you information like this, for example, I have 5 offers, 3 of them are over yours, but this 5th one is like 50 grand more. Like, why are they telling you this? Because we do want to help each other out. And a lot of times you do work with really great people that help you get the sale for your client, and you help them with theirs. And that comes from, mutual respect and agreement with the information that you're giving one another. But if they're giving you this information they should not be legally giving you, for example, the amount they have for an offer, you want to wonder, why are they giving me this? This is a person I've never met before, I've never worked with before. Why are they telling me this information? And they're telling me because they want me to go and tell my client and influence them to put in a bigger offer. So if you're working with a good agent, they will advise you of these things. And a lot of times that comes with a lot of hard conversations that you have to have, because for this house specifically, like my client really wanted that house. They were willing to do anything they could to get the house. But if you know that this is way beyond their budget and you can push them to go a little bit more over their budget, you have to have that tough conversation of like, hey, you could go this route, but it's already shady to begin with. Like, this person that you're working with is kind of like not really doing things ethically. So how do you know that when we get time to do inspections, they're going to try to like play us again? You don't know. But also you have to like steer clear of things like this. And again, regardless of if you're on the buying or selling side, you have to have the best interests for your client in mind. And that can be having tough conversations with them, even when they want something, but it's not the best case for them. And then signs that a buyer is wasting your time. This happens a lot of times too, where you are going to so many homes, seeing so many homes with a buyer, and you think or you assume that they're going to buy a house, but then like they don't. And that happens often, and you can't really get mad at the buyer. That's why you have to like trust your gut, and over time you get better at knowing what's a waste of your time and what's not. But a way to avoid this is, if you are working with a buyer, you want to make sure that you have knowledge that they are willing and their intention is to buy a house. So whether that be proof of funds, a pre-qualification letter, something that tells you that they are going to buy a house, like they are ready and willing to buy a house. Some things you can't avoid or you can't even plan for example, if they're looking for something and they can't find it on the market because inventory is low, it wouldn't be necessarily a waste of your time, because you can't force them to buy a house. But if you can't avoid your time being wasted, then try to mitigate that with a pre-qualification letter, proof of funds, etc. And then going into that third one, no proof of funds. So you don't want to be that agent, because we do end up, especially if you're working in a specific area, you do end up working with the same people over and over again. So you don't ever want to be that agent that's always sending in offers that are like blank offers that say like, hey, my client is going to give you 50 grand over asking, but then like you never follow up with proof of funds, you never follow up with pre-qualification. You are always sending offers and like never actually having a serious buyer. And that only hurts you and your reputation with other agents, because they know that you might not have a serious buyer. And that might happen only once, where you have a non-serious buyer that has you sending out a bunch of offers, but that could be detrimental to your reputation as a real estate agent. And when you're in the business of working with people, your reputation does matter a lot, whether that be with other agents or buyers and sellers. And then the executional contract. So you have an offer, you sent it in, or you accepted an offer, depending on what side you're in. What happens next? So what is the buyer responsible for? If you're on the buying side and you're working with a buyer, then you want to make sure that if they have a mortgage commitment they have to fulfill, so if they're getting a mortgage for the home, that they are working actively towards getting that mortgage commitment, and that if they've gotten pre-approval, that they're looking around seeing what mortgage package works for them and getting that appraisal done. Delivery of earnest money. So earnest money is something that goes with your down payment, but is not really your down payment. So if you are putting in an offer and you know that you really want this house, something that you could do is put in with your offer money, earnest money, that will go towards your down payment, but is something that the selling side holds in escrow until the day of closing. So if I really want this house, I will say, hey, I want this house. I will send you like $3,000 with my offer. If you accept it, then you get to keep that money in escrow and it goes towards my down payment. But if you don't accept my offer, then that money goes back to me. But what that shows you, the seller, is that I am very, very interested in buying your house, and I have good faith that I will go through with the purchase of this home. And showing and sending that money is a way of showing that I have the money in a way. You know, I'm actively giving you my money, so, and I'm having you hold it. And the money's not going to disappear, like whether the contract goes bad or goes well. You know, this is not just you giving the seller like 3 grand, but it does show that you have every reason to buy the house and you're willing to buy it. So if you said in your offer you're going to give them this money, then you want to make sure you give that right away with your offer. Or if it's like, I'll give you 1 grand now, but 2 grand after the inspections are done, and then that 3 grand is going to go towards your overall down payment and closing. You want to make sure that you're on top of that. And then your inspections. So if you have any inspections that you put in your offer that you want to do, you want to make sure that you're actively working to get those inspections done and by the date you said you were going to do them by. And your real estate agent does often have connections that you can work with. So if you don't know a good inspector, or you don't know what inspections you should be doing, your real estate agent does have so many contacts that they can help you out with and give you the right people to work with, whether that be an inspector or a lawyer, etc. And then the seller is responsible for adhering to the contingencies of the contract. So if it said that, if it said that you are going to move out by a certain date, then you want to make sure that you moved out by that certain date. Or if you said that for like the final walkthrough, right, that you're going to leave this chandelier and that you're going to leave that table, then by the time the final walkthrough is coming through, then you have all these things done. Or if you agree that you're going to buy the house, but the seller has to paint it before you, or like fix certain things before you move in, you want to make sure that the minute the contract is in order, that your seller is doing all these things to get it to the closing. So it's definitely a collaborative effort at this point between the buyer, the seller, the agents, the lawyers, mortgage people, appraisers, etc., inspectors. It's definitely, this is the time that everyone's collaborating together to make sure the sale goes through. And then if there's any adjustments made, so if an inspection happens and you find out that something like electrical is completely wrong with the house, you have that opportunity to say, okay, we have these findings. We're not that comfortable going through the original, offer. If you either give my client credit or maybe you fix the electrical work with proof that you got it fixed, we're willing to move forward. Things like that. Any adjustments made to the contract, they need to be altered. The contract needs to be altered and then also signed by both parties. So it's in paper that we're moving forward with the deal, but you have these adjustments that were both, like, everyone was on the same page with that. And then some red flags with contracts. So unreasonable clients, that happens a lot, whether you're a buyer or a seller. For example, paint or some things that aren't a big deal, but your client might think is a big deal, where you have to understand where they're coming from and also use the fact that they trust you and that they're accepting of the fact that you might know more than they do in situations like this. So if you come to a property and like all the rooms are like different pastel colors and your client's like, oh, I don't like this, I don't want to buy the house anymore, that would be a little bit unreasonable, because in today's market, like, what, you're not going to buy it because it's pastels, you're going to want to paint anyways, right? So sometimes clients do this because they're looking for any little thing to get them out of the deal. Like, oh, I thought I wanted this house, but I don't want it anymore. So I'm going to say I don't want it because of the paint color. That's really, really hard to hold up, unless you have a really bad inspection that makes it easy for you and your client to back out of this deal. Going in and saying things like this, you do want to go and talk to your client and say, you're going to want to paint the house anyways. Every house that you see, and even give them examples of like, these houses are painted ugly too. You're going to have to paint them anyways. And you're never going to come into a house that's perfect for you and your family. You're going to probably do some tweaking, and painting is the last thing that would be an issue, believe me. So unreasonable clients are one of them. And even on the selling side, so buyers too, but sellers, if there was something that was masked really well, like throughout the buying process, and then the inspection came up and you saw that there was a huge issue with plumbing or piping or something, and you tell them, hey, I want this fixed, like, you're going to have a hard time now knowing these issues. You're going to have to put the house back on the market if we don't go through with this deal. And now that you know this, you're going to have to disclose this in the disclosures with future buyers that you have these plumbing issues. And it's going to give you a much bigger headache than it is now. So, fix it and we can go through with it. If you have these stubborn buyers or sellers, it becomes a very interesting collaboration between the real estate agents to actually get that sale to go through. Because like, we know that if there's this plumbing issue that was uncovered and they have to go put their house back on the market, the seller knows that they're going to have a headache putting the house back on the market, because their seller is not going to want to take a big price cut on it. But they know that they're going to have to disclose this information and actually list it accordingly. And then the buyer too, like, that they're not going to want to fix that themselves, but you also know that they have this like power over the seller in a way. Like, we have this information we uncovered, like, give us some closing credit or cut the price down a little bit. It becomes a really big negotiation effort, and that's when most of the negotiating happens in the contract execution, because in some ways one party might have more power over the other party, and it's between the agents to figure out like a common ground where both people will have, like, it'll be good for both people. And then I did touch upon this, like, detrimental inspection results. There's only so much that we can let our client know about, and we are not inspectors. So when we go out to see a property with our client, a lot of times we are putting trust in the disclosures that they provided for us, like the selling side. So if we see that they put that the roof was only 10 years old, and then we go see a roof that is in like critical bad condition, we can tell our client, hey, they said it was 10 years old. We have every like intention to think that they're not lying to us right away, but it's clearly in bad condition. So that's something that you will have to like keep in mind moving forward, that like clearly the roof needs to be replaced. And avoidable delays in meeting terms of contract. So there are some things, especially at the height of the pandemic, a lot of mortgage companies were very, very behind. And I mean, oftentimes it would be on the lender, the reason why things are delayed. And we can only mitigate that so much. Like we have lenders that we prefer working with that we know and we can recommend to our clients. Like, I know this guy's really great. He's going to get you all of your approvals and all that on time because I know the work that they do. But if you're working with a client that's working with a big lender, you don't know how quickly they're going to get these like documents to you to have you have like a clear to close. So you have to have good faith that everyone's doing their job, but there are some times where things could be avoidable. For example, inspections. If your client waited until like a week after they sent in the offer to finally look for inspectors, then that could be avoidable. You could tell them right away to get on top of it so that they don't miss out on the window that they had to get the inspection, that they mentioned that they were gonna get the inspection done by within this time. So it's definitely, like I mentioned, a collaborative negotiation effort when you're on this part of the transaction. And then the final step in a real estate transaction is the closing. So you did all this work with your client, you're finally at the closing table, and what happens? So closing is actually the transfer of title between the seller and the buyer, so the now new owner of the property. And what happens is the day of the closing, usually or the day before, the seller will have had all what they said they were going to do done. So if they said they were going to replace this outlet, they replaced it. If they said they were going to paint the deck, they painted the deck. You and your buyer go to the house and check it out, do a final walkthrough, and by that point, everything should be moved out and the house is in the condition that you agreed upon in your contract. Then the buyers are going to meet at the attorney's office and sign the closing documents. So behind the scenes, what lawyers do and why they're involved in the real estate transaction is because there's an official shift of title between this owner and then the new owner. So you want to make sure that there's no liens, there's nothing like overdue property tax, there's nothing that would become an issue for this new owner of the house for them to have clear title of the property. And if there are these issues, then they're uncovered and they're like delegated and fixed before the day of closing. Because on the day of closing, you're gonna like tell your buyer, hey, you're gonna have ownership of this house, you're gonna get the key and move in. So before closing, everything is looked at and done to make sure that's happening on the day of the closing. And then at this point, the seller, so closing is more for the buyers, but the sellers at this point have already met with their attorneys and signed off all of the documents that are left to be signed off on their end. So they're giving their title to this new owner. So they're meeting with their attorneys to make sure that if there are overdue property taxes, like who's paying them? Let's make sure they're paid before we go and give the ownership to these new people. And then the buyers get the key to the property, and then that's the day or a few days after, etc. It really depends, but that's the day that agents get paid. So like I mentioned before, real estate agents do not get paid until the sale of a property. So just think about all this work that is done beforehand for the actual closing. And that's just a little pettiness. People think real estate agents don't do anything and that everyone could just sell their own houses. Like, we do a lot of stuff to make sure we get our clients to this day to closing. And here are some red flags at closing. So if you're at the final walkthrough, the property is not in the condition agreed upon. So this happens a lot. I mean, like I mentioned before, you're working with real people with real lives. And a lot of times, I mean, if you're in a back and forth negotiation process about the house and inspection results, by the day of the closing, you might have a seller who is just so fed up that they just don't want to do anything. And every request that comes in from the buyer side is like a slap in the face to them. Like, oh, they really want me to do this. Like, they want me to do this other thing. And they might be very lackluster with the way that they do things. So that's where it comes to the real estate agents to go and look at the property beforehand so that they are not surprised when the final walkthrough comes in and then the agent calls them like, why is this here? Like, you told me you would get rid of it. And again, that goes back to reputation too, because you want to make sure that you are representing, like, you are representing yourself in every sale that you do. So you want to make sure that even if you're working with clients that are really hard to work with, that you don't make a bad name for yourself between agents. And an example of this is I had a closing where I did go to the property beforehand to make sure that everything was the way it was supposed to be and that my clients were, you know, but I knew I was working with clients that were already fed up and they were just ready to, sell their house and move on. So I did go look at the house. I did a final walkthrough. I did pick up some random things that they left behind that was just very petty, like things that they shouldn't have left, but they left because they thought they could get away with it. But whatever. Like it would be like tape, like that had like not even one piece of tape left in it. And they're like, oh, we left it for the new owners in case they needed tape. And it's like, you didn't do that, but it's okay. That's what I'm here for, to clean it up. So all these things, I have a bag full of trash that I picked up because I knew it wasn't supposed to be there. I go home, I'm feeling really good about this. I'm thinking this is going to be great. And I remember in the beginning of the sale, there was a bunch of lumber and not really like they didn't have a fireplace. So they just had a bunch of lumber hanging around the backyard because they did a lot of like burning of stuff, but they didn't have a fireplace. So the new owner didn't need the lumber. So the agent told me that they want all of that gone. And I mean, it was a lot of wood. So obviously it would take a lot of effort from my sellers to get rid of the wood. And there was also little things like tires, scrap metal all around the yard that they just wanted to get rid of because they had no use for it. So I told my clients this. They told me that they'll fix it. They got it, all under control. And by that point, if you're just asking your clients to do one thing after another, there comes a point where they get tired of you asking for things and they'll just be like, I did it, whether they did it or not. And that's where you just understand that they're going through. It's okay. It's not against you. It's just they're not really in the best mood. So I go through the house. Everything's great. I get my bag of trash. I'm feeling really good. And then I get a call from the agent the next day and they're just livid because there's like 5 to 6 tires, a bunch of lumber and all that behind the garage. And I didn't think to look behind the garage because why would I assume that my clients would set me up this way? But you don't know until you know. So then afterwards, I had my clients go and pick it up because they thought they were being slick with just putting the trash in the corner and thinking no one was going to look there. But seeing that way, like the buyer and their agent had a difficult time because they saw something that made them very like, oh no, what's going on? If there's trash here, what else are we going to find in the house? But then also on my end, on the seller's end, I had sellers who really didn't have the time that day to go and move tires out, but like I gave them weeks to do that. So there are a lot of things that are like little red flags, but they can always be fixed. Even if we're like that deep into the sale and something comes up, it can always be fixed when you're working with a real estate agent because we make sure that we get you to that closing. And then avoidable delays on lender and attorney. Sometimes, I mean, that's why you really got to work with people that you trust. And over time, your real estate agent will accumulate that portfolio of people that they know gets the job done and produces good work that they can then give you and make it easier for you to go through with that transaction. But some things can be avoidable, and we try our best to make sure that they're all finished and all the loose ends are tied before the day of the closing. And then tenant issues, if applicable, this can be a huge problem for a lot of people with tenants. So if you're buying or selling a home that has a tenant in it, a lot of times, if you already have an agreement with the tenant that they're going to be able to live there for another year past when you sold your house, then that's something that it's on you. Like you bought a house knowing that the tenant would live there for another year. You can't complain that the tenant's living there because they have a contract in place. And at times you could have them agree to move out and work that out. But most times, if a tenant already had a contract to stay there, then they're going to stay there. Other times, especially with month-to-month tenants, if you buy a house and the seller already had the conversation with the tenant that the house is going for sale and the people who bought it are looking to live there and they have that agreement, you could have a tenant that's very agreeable and is on the same page as you in the beginning, but then when it comes time to actually move out, they never move out. So I've had clients that have had issues with tenants where they're looking to move into a house, they can't move in because there's a tenant there. And sometimes the tenant does have that legal right to stay there, but oftentimes they don't. And it becomes really tricky. So you want to make sure that before you get into those situations, that your real estate agent is doing everything they can to gather all the information for you on what the tenant's rights are and what the lease looks like for the tenant and the current owner of the house. So that can be a really big issue, especially if you're looking to move into a house and you bought a house, you just spent all this money on it, and now you don't know what to do. And oftentimes that does get taken to court, but that can be a very, very long process. So we always try to avoid things like this, and sometimes they can't be avoided. So that's where we're all just working together to make sure that you get what you want on both ends, the buyer and the seller. And that is it. So I went through a lot. I went through a very SparkNote summary of real estate transactions, but I know it's still a lot of information. So I'll leave this screen up. It has my number. You can call me, text me whenever you want. My email, my website. So I mentioned Zillow is terrible, and real estate agents don't like Zillow for many reasons, but a big reason for it is because Zillow is all like crowdsourced data. So there will be a lot of properties on Zillow that are actually not for sale. And we'll have clients wanting to look at properties that aren't for sale, that were put up for sale like 10 years ago. And Zillow is still out there telling people that the property's for sale and it's worth this much money when it's not. And also Zillow is terrible at their estimates. They'll tell you your house is worth something it's really not. And you'll have people coming to sell their house and tell you like, no, I want to get this much money for my house because Zillow told me it would give me this much money, but in reality, it's just crowdsourced information. And we have a database as real estate agents that we use where we can see what houses are really for sale, what houses are coming up, and get you real information. And I have actually a website that uses the database that we use. So a lot of times real estate agents will have their own website, or their brokerage will have a website. And that's a lot more trustworthy because like even if you don't use me as your real estate agent, you can still use my website. That's why I have that up there. But yeah, so any questions? We have a little bit of time left.
So I did get some questions in the chat. We probably only have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah.
I know one question was, how did you end up choosing real estate, and how did your time at UConn aid in your time with real estate, being that it wasn't your major?
Yeah, so in UConn, I was in the School of Business and I had a degree in management information systems. And the way the School of Business works is you can't really get another minor unless it's like data analytics and the minors that they choose for you. So technically, I don't have a real estate minor, but I did take the classes needed and more for the real estate minor. So that's why I added in there, because I don't think the School of Business should be working like that, especially since real estate is an amazing thing for people to get into, even if they're not looking to get their license. But the reason why I pursued my career in real estate is because when me and my family came to America, my parents were like, we were refugees and we were on government assistance for a little bit, and my parents really like worked their little tails off to be able to afford a house. And when they did afford their house, they got a 3-family house because that was a lot more financially, it made sense financially for them to get a 3-family house and live in one of the floors and still have tenants on 2 floors, instead of going, and if they were looking to buy a single family house that they deserve, they would never have a house. So from a very young age, I knew what it was like to work really hard to be able to afford something, an asset like a real estate property, and what that can do for the future for your kids and what it can teach you. And also you get home ownership while still having that income from tenants. So from a really young age, I learned that through my parents, and I had an interest in that. I mean, I didn't really ever have an interest in living in 1 floor and renting out 2, but I knew the business side of what that could do for you if you find the right property at the right price. And you can definitely find another little bit of income with adding real estate properties in your portfolio. So I always had that in the back of my head. And then also I was a really big fan of HGTV. I love $1 Million Listing. I love looking at how ridiculous, like sometimes you're just like, how do people live like this in the same world that I live in? And it's fun. I love that side of real estate. I love going to showings. I love helping my clients find their perfect home. I love home shopping, even though I'm not the one buying the home. And I knew that real estate was something that I was interested in, which is why I got my license, because I want to continue what my parents did. I want to continue adding investment properties to my portfolio. And I knew that that's like for sure something that I'm interested in. I want to make a business for myself. But the actual competitive side of real estate, not necessarily competitive, but like I was mentioning, there's a lot of like different sides to real estate, and I could never do this full time if I'm being honest. I like my job that I have, and I am really good at the job that I have, but I'm also very good at real estate. Just my current day job doesn't give me as much headaches as real estate does. So I like working with people that I can trust, that I know I can help, and that I can give a really good experience to. So I'm very selective with the people that I do work with. And it's not always to make a sale, it's to make sure that they get a really good experience with buying their house. But regardless of if I continue being an active real estate agent, meaning like I go out and buy, sell properties for my clients, I'm going to keep my license just for that side. I want to eventually acquire investment properties, and that is my real niche in real estate. And I think honestly, the University of Connecticut is really great at giving those classes. Even if you're interested, like for the slightest bit, I would recommend going in and taking classes. I don't remember the name of a class specifically, but we talked about like investment properties and how to figure out what's worth your money. And I think classes like that, like whether you want your license or not, those are very important when you're making like financial decisions as an adult, so that you know where to find information and how to make decisions when it comes to your money.
Thank you. So you did answer one of the other questions that someone asked. So I guess the last question that I'll ask you is just what's one piece of advice that you give students who are interested in real estate as a career?
Yeah, so I definitely recommend creating a network and talking to other people that have interests that you have. I know there is a real estate club at UConn. I don't know the name of it, but I was involved in some of the events there too. I just had like a really busy schedule as an undergrad, so I didn't always make it to the events. But I think it's important to find people that have the same interests as you do, and making those connections and knowing how to do that early on is really important. Because for me, I didn't have anyone that was interested in real estate around me to that degree of going and getting my license. I had my parents who had experience being, landlords, if you would say, but they didn't know really, like I talk to them every single day about things that they're doing wrong and how they're managing their multifamily. So I didn't really have that connection with people. I had one person that I knew that was a broker, which I work for him now. And you want to make sure you make those connections, because in order for you to get your real estate license, you do have to have a brokerage that you're going to work for. So you can go and pass the exam and get your license in theory, but you won't have an active license unless you are working for a brokerage, and then you can eventually become a broker yourself. But you do want to make sure that if you're going to work for a really big brokerage like Keller Williams, you make those connections early on and you work with people that you actually want to work with. But it's important to have people in your corner that trust you and that are believing in you. And another thing too is like, if you have any interest in anything, and this goes beyond real estate, but as an undergrad, I did this a lot, and I'm really happy that I did it. I pursued everything that I had an interest in. If I even had a remote thought that like I would want to do this with my life, I would go and take a class. And if I, like, for example, healthcare management, I thought I wanted to I didn't even know what I thought I wanted to do with healthcare management, but I went for it. I took a class. I failed the first test, and I just cut my losses short, and I moved on with my life. And in life, you can't really do that easily with how you can as an undergrad. So if you do have an interest in anything, literally anything, UConn has a lot of resources. So I would recommend going and chasing those while you're there and learning how to cut your losses short when it doesn't work out, because those skills are really important for real life when you don't have the time or even maybe the money to be pursuing all your dreams at once. So I would recommend that above anything that I feel like is applicable like beyond real estate.
Okay. Well, thank you, Belma, for really just closing us out in our last masterclass of the semester. We definitely
Thank you.
appreciate you. And for the participants still here, again, here are Belma's contact information. I'll be sure to send you your certificates shortly in the next couple of days. By the end of this week, you'll have your certificate and Belma's contact information. But thank you all for participating. Definitely keep looking at the Center for Career Development's website for other events. And closer to the summer / the beginning of next semester, there will be some more master classes in the works. So I hope you all have a great day.